Intro. I hope you get something from this book. Discovering the silence within is so much needed today. They say you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Maybe, just maybe, this is salt that is put into your food. We're all on the journey of life together. Hope you enjoy this book.
One experience I remember was in Little League. I was stepping up to the plate and the catcher, Ricky Nixon, the nephew of Richard Nixon, told me that a young Indian boy born in India would someday come to the West and teach knowledge of oneself. Years later, after meeting Raji, this experience filtered back to my consciousness. The Indians believe that the whole universe is being recorded like a video camera. Man has the potential to tap into the energy fluctuations and bring back experiences from the past and the future. Take Nostradamus, the famous French philosopher. He had the ability to foretell the future. Every human on the face of the planet has this potential, but it remains hidden. I'm sure that years later, Ricky Nixon never remembered saying such a thing. Can our minds be used like an antenna and prophesize things in the future, and yet as humans, we are totally unconscious about it? I remember years later this episode. Even back then, I had signs in my life to relax, enjoy this ride of life. Patience pays off. We just have to be persistent, and in the end, everything will come to fruition. It was kind of funny that years later, Richard Nixon became president. I remember during the Watergate crisis, I was glad he had to leave office. Years later, I have a different perspective on things. But before he died, I admired him for being a great statesman. He was crucified by the world, and yet he came back and carried on with dignity. My view of him changed. I guess you would say I had love and compassion for him. I felt he was an old wise man for America. Over the years, my feelings and thoughts changed. During the Nixon era, I was very much against the war. I was anti-Nixon. But over time, we can respect those whose ideas don't follow our own. I'm yearning to be more open and accepting of other people. Years later, I can see that God always provides hints that He is inside of us.
May 2nd, 2020. One thing leads to another. One thing does lead to another. This is an incredible journey. I remember in my junior year at Newport Harbor High, an elective class that changed my life forever. The entire student body had a choice of 3 or more electives that one had to choose from. Quite frankly, I only remember the one I took. The one I took was a 3-week yoga class that took place on our basketball court. Did anyone out there take that elective? I remember Michael Folks, brother of Missy, taking the class. The teachers were Ramakrishna Ananda, Graham Ledgerwood, and his lovely wife at the time. The class blew my mind. They had opened up doors that I knew existed, yet didn't know how to open them up myself. It was love at first sight, yet it was so radical. At that time, there was only one yoga studio in our area. I was 17 years old at that time. Surfing and yoga became my passion in life. Does anyone know how they were invited to our high school? It was extremely radical for its time. It was like a communist coming to our school and teaching communism. This was 51 years ago. Today, the area is flooded with yoga studios. In fact, even my mother took classes there in the 80s. Here's the address, 445 East 17th Street, Costa Mesa, next to the car wash. It has been there for 51 years. After I took this 3-week course, I took classes at their yoga center. The incredible wife taught yoga postures, and Graham taught meditation. This helped set my foundation for life. I still practice both today. I think I remember Buddy Owens taking both classes. I don't remember. This series of events led me to go on my surfing odyssey and meditation odyssey around the world, especially in India. That, my friend, is even more of an incredible story. One thing does lead to another.
Craig Perkins. Craig and I became friends during my junior year of high school. Craig has a great sense of humor. I remember one time my brother and I went on a mountain excursion to a mountain park in the mountains of Orange County. There's this small trail on this cliff. The trail was probably under 2 feet wide. Well, my brother and I were petrified of crossing this. I remember walking very slowly and conscious of every step. My brother John did the same. And here comes Craig, dancing to the tune of Tiptoes to the Tulips. He would kick one foot over the hill edge and then do the same thing to his other foot. It was quite the sight to see. Craig loved the ocean. He was quite the surf photographer. He had a great cannon for its time. Craig was a kneeboarder. He could ride his kneeboard at the Newport Beach famous break the wedge on a big day. I haven't seen Craig in many years. I heard he's living in Mexico. My brother bumped into him in San Diego in the late 90s. He was in a fast food restaurant, and my brother heard Craig's voice. That was a giveaway. That was the last time we heard from him. While I was in France, one day I woke up and saw huge waves breaking. The waves were probably 15 feet high. The surf spot was at Lofar, a famous but now extinct surf spot. I took off on a huge wave, stood up, and the next moment I was free falling down the wave. Back then there were no leashes. My board got carried to shore. Lofar had a jetty, and there were 15-foot waves breaking on the rocks. The rip was so strong it was like a river. For the first time in my life I said, Lord, if you exist, you had better do something real fast. I closed my eyes and saw an incredible light and a small Indian boy. The next moment I was on shore. Everybody on shore said it was a miracle. The next day I decided to go to India. As I look back at that experience, I felt the hand embraced my life. I felt so protected. Here I was only 18 years old, but I knew my life was protected. I was about to start the adventure of a lifetime. This is definitely a near-death experience for me. In the early 70s, I read books about the death experience, and my experience closely resembled that experience. I saw a great light which filled my being with bliss that is boundless. I saw a figure which told me without words that everything would be all right. This experience I knew could be experienced consciously. It didn't have to be a hit or miss affair. I knew a human being could experience the source directly, no matter if he or she were dreaming, sleeping, dreaming, or in the wake state. Man had the ability to tap into the source of life. After my surfing accident, Peter and I started our trip to India. I was very excited. I knew that something wonderful was going to happen in India. All my dreams would come true. We drove from Biarritz to Venice, where we stayed 2 days with an Italian friend from high school. We drove through Yugoslavia. At that time, it was a communist country. The people at that time were very suspicious of outsiders. They weren't very friendly. The countryside was amazing. We were high up in the mountains and could see the Mediterranean Sea. Peter would drive and he had this harmonica he would play. He was actually a good player. We drove to Athens in Greece. We spent a week there. I loved going to the Parthenon. Here I was in the cradle of such an incredible civilization. I was in awe. We sold our car and took an airplane to Turkey. When we landed in Istanbul, I knew this is where East meets West. The city was so different. The Muslim mosques were so beautiful. The policemen had submachine guns. I never saw that before. I remember staying at this house where a lady came in and said we had better leave because the police was going to raid the place. She said people used drugs and the police were going to bust the place. I felt someone taking care of me. I didn't want to end up in a Turkish jail, especially because I don't use drugs. That would be hard to prove in Turkey. We spent a week in Istanbul and then went to Ankara. In Ankara we had to stay a week because the border was closed. The Shah of Iran was having the 1,000-year anniversary party for Persia. He didn't want young Westerners or trouble to come to his land for this party. I heard that the Shah even built props to hide the poverty. I had a friend who went to the party and said it was quite the affair. They had air-conditioned tents. The Shah spent thousands of dollars. While in Ankara, we saw the Queen of England in a parade. There were thousands of soldiers carrying submachine guns. After a week, the border was open and we took trains and buses to Iran. It was quite a scene traveling. Both Peter and I carried our surfboards and our packs. The trains were quite dirty and packed. We slept on the floor of the train. The buses were like the trains, but they had livestock on board. I was getting quite a lesson on life. We arrived at the capital of Tehran. Tehran was quite a beautiful city. We found out that a week before, a young American tourist died the week before. Supposedly she entered a Muslim mosque and was stoned to death. The reason was that only Muslims could go inside the temple. I met a man from the secret police. He came up to me and said that he killed about 30 Americans this year. In Iran, if they find drugs in you, they would shoot you on the spot. What a way to control the drug problem. We then took buses to the border of Afghanistan. This is where the scenery drastically changed. I felt I was transferred back 2,000 years ago. The Afghan people are warriors. Their culture is the same for thousands of years. We were in a high mountain desert. Everyone carried guns or rifles. This is way before the Soviet invasion. I felt I was in a Wild West town. There was no law or order. The people were quite nice, but I knew you didn't want to cross them up. The people in Afghanistan smoked a lot of hash. They used this drug like alcohol. The whole nation used it. The food was quite good. We took a bus from the border and made it to Kabul. Along the way, we bumped into this lion named Charlie Krishna. Charlie was a great guy and we traveled together. Kabul at this time was a hangout for the European hippies. The Europeans were heavily involved in drugs. They used a lot of opium. It was quite sad to see people my age totally addicted to opium. There's nothing I could do. Many of them simply wasted away. The drug was very cheap and could be bought anywhere. I knew a lot of my friends in the States would have loved to be in that environment. It was an eye-opening experience. For the first time, I saw so many kids totally wasted and hanging on to life with a thread. They were thousands of miles from home. During this time, I would meditate every day. I knew something incredible was going to happen to me in India. I just had the intuition that my dreams would come true. I wish I would meet someone who could show me the way to open the door. I felt totally protected. It's a beautiful feeling to know that someone is watching over you. I was thousands of miles away from home, and yet I felt great inside. I felt protected. My main goal was to get to India. Ever since I left France, that feeling kept on getting stronger. I felt such a wave and anticipation that my dreams will come true. I had only a short time and it would be shown to me. I left Kabul and took the Khyber Pass from Afghanistan into Pakistan. The Khyber Pass was used by Genghis Khan. It's one of the oldest trade routes in the world. Throughout history, it has been an important trade route between Central Asia and India. What a radical road. It was all dirt, which most of Afghanistan was. There was no guardrails, and we had these crazy drivers driving as fast as they could down the pass. The buses were quite different. Each bus would have a different altar depending on which religion they belonged to. There would be flowers, incense, pictures, and memorabilia. We would be driving down this huge mountain on a skinny road. This was the one and only route from Afghanistan to Pakistan. The following day, I packed up my bags and took a train to Premnagar. Maraji's ashram is near Hardwar. It's a small town in the foothills of the Himalayas. The next 2 weeks I listened to discourses about this knowledge. Something inside of me knew that I was to receive the experience of a lifetime. I knew the door to my soul was to be opened. Words are hard to express the feeling that was going inside of my being. I knew that in a short time I'd be shown and would reveal the secret of life itself. I knew this experience was real. I told a lot of people who had the experience. I could tell and sense that something wonderful was going on. I liked the idea that the proof is in the pudding. I didn't want to join a cult or religious group. I just wanted a direct and continuous experience of the power that's keeping me alive. I knew through practice this could be achieved. During this time, the war between India and Pakistan was going on. Each night there were air raid sirens going on, and off in the distance we could hear bombs going on. There was a general blackout at night. Pakistani bombers were only miles away. Air raid sirens were heard in the distance. At that ashram, the whole place was so serene, while this part of the world, people were dying. Trains of Pakistanis were being massacred going from India to Pakistan, and trainloads of Indians were being massacred going from Pakistan into India. Such a dichotomy. I'll never forget my initiation. There were probably about 20 of us in a small room. Maraji had initiators who revealed his knowledge. We were in the room while Maraji was playing on top of the roof directly overhead of us. This experience that I had that day still sends shivers of joy, just merely the thought. The first technique the initiator revealed was the light technique. I always knew that the human being had the ability to see the light inside. This is an actual experience. When the initiator touched my forehead, I felt this incredible surge of energy. I knew at that point that something incredible was going to happen. My whole body and soul sensed it. My consciousness completely left its physical existence. A golden circle of light appeared. Inside of this circle, a brilliant blue star appeared. This golden circle of light and this blue star was so beautiful. It's probably the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Waves of love, joy, and peace were surging inside my consciousness. All of a sudden, the star transferred into a ray, a tunnel of blue light which went on for infinity. I merged with the blue ray. It's very hard to describe this experience. I was at home. The doors were open. I was given the keys, and it was up to me to cultivate that experience. I have definite proof that we are more than these bodies. All of a sudden, the mystery of life was revealed. I knew the secrets behind our religion. There was There was a genuine experience that could be shown and experienced. Years later, I realized that this experience was initiation into Lord Michael's Blue Ray. It was the Jacob's Ladder. This experience was the ladder to God. To this day, I'll never forget this experience. It gave me practical proof that God exists. I knew it, but this was a practical experience. It was more real than any outside human experience. I knew my life was on track. I had waited years to go home. I was shown such a glorious place. When I returned to this body and regained physical consciousness, my whole body was shaking like a duck. My body had a hard time. Can you imagine being hooked up to the power plant of the whole universe? I knew no damage was done. Over time, I knew that the body was built and designed to handle these kinds of currents. Day by day, through meditation, man can slowly harmonize with these frequencies and begin to vibrate at this frequency. There were 3 other techniques that were revealed. One was the music technique. I was shown how to listen to the innermost frequencies of life. Since God is energy, man has the capability to be in tune and listen to subtle yet energy frequencies. Different religions have different concepts about this experience. By listening to this music over time, man is filled with such a joy and peace in his life. The mind slowly begins to slow down. In this state, man gets in contact with an energy frequency that is infinite. This energy is pure love and bliss. The whole universe is comprised of this energy. It was, is, and will always be. This is the Word of God. Every major religion talks about the Word in some form or another. This is a very simple technique where man can be in direct communication with the subtle energy. When a person first receives this initiation, the Word is very subtle. The majority of people really don't understand the power of this Word. I know a lot of people who took this experience and never really tried it out. Over time, I can consciously put myself in direct communication with this Word. My whole being is instantly filled with such a wave of love and bliss. I'm not there 24 hours a day, but I know it's possible. I have had experiences that I was completely taken out of this physical world and taken into a place where there's no time and space. The only thing that existed was this incredible energy of love. I know I was at home with my Father. This energy exists throughout all creation. It exists in the manifest and unmanifest. It exists throughout time and space and beyond. All of creation came from this Word. In the Bible in St. John, the verse goes like this: in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Human beings have the capability to tune into this experience. The last experience was one of the living waters or nectar experience. When man is in this experience, powerful hormones and enzymes are secreted through the endocrine system. Through the ages, man has learned that he has a capability to actually experience this nectar or living water. Just one drop of this is an incredible, powerful experience. One drop has the capability to take man's consciousness into a definite altered state. This fluid is very cleansing to the body. When Christ was in the desert for 40 days and nights, he lived off this manna. This experience is energy in its subtle form. It is energy, yet it transmutes itself into matter. This experience is very powerful to the endocrine system. I've had numerous experiences of this nectar. It's probably the most intoxicating drug known in the universe. Unlike a drug which has side effects, this experience is completely beneficial to the body and soul. These experiences reveal over time who we truly are. We are more than our mind and body. We are in fact the source of life. Each one of us are part of this universal consciousness. We just don't remember it. It's amazing when we were born, we came from the source. Our whole body was this consciousness. Over time, we forgot. Years later, we have completely forgot of our true existence. After the initiation, I thank my Creator for revealing Himself to me. My dreams come true. I had the tools. Everything made sense to me. I could read the scriptures and understand the hidden meaning. The scriptures were at the same wavelength. I had a lot of respect for the major religions. While we were in Bombay one day, I was in Raji's room, where all of a sudden he got out of his bed, stood up, and started to wave his hands toward one of his initiators, Ashoka. The hair on his whole body stood up. It looked like he put his hand in a light socket. He was yelling, "Please, Raji, stop it." After about 20 seconds, Raji's hand fell to his side and Ashoka was back to normal. Being an 18-year-old kid that I was, I said, "Hi, Raji. Do you want to zap him once more?" Raji said, "Sure." And just for a fraction of a second, he raised his hand and put electricity back into him. Raji was electrocuting him. We all laughed. This is my first time that I spent close time with Maraji. There was only a few Westerners there. It was so beautiful to play with him. At the same time, have a great respect for him. Well, we finally met up with Tess and Kathleen. We switched partners. I hitchhiked with Tess to the capital of Zambia. We all decided to meet there. It was quite an experience. We arrived at Lusaka, got out of the car, and moments later, colleague Kathleen got out of the car. We were all standing there when this Zambian came up to us and offered us to stay at his house. We went to his house, a dairy in the country. His name was Gary. We told him what we were doing and where we were going. At this time, our money situation was zero. A few days before, we ran out of money. I was pleased because I would see that everything would be taken care of. Anyway, Gary's uncle was president of the national TV in Zambia. He could arrange a television interview for us. The next day, around 5 o'clock, after the news, we were on national television. I only wore my Indian whites and no shoes. We had a beautiful interview for about 1 hour. The interviewer was very sincere. There was no sarcasm in his voice. The people of Africa were simple and open people. The TV station received hundreds of phone calls asking, "What was that?" The response was so great that the next day we were asked back to the TV station. The same phenomena happened. The Indian community heard us and invited us to their community. Every day we would give discourses in their temples and homes. We were treated like kings and queens. They would give us money, watches, and clothes. We had probably at least 6 major meals a day. It is a custom to accept food at someone's home. Each one of our guests would provide a huge spread. I remember one Hindu temple where the priest would take down Krishna's picture and put up Raji's picture. This is like the Catholic Church taking down Christ's picture. I remember seeing the Victoria Falls like it was yesterday. There was hundreds of monkeys in a forest canopy overlooking this incredible waterfall. Colleen and I stood on this bridge, and a 360-degree rainbow encircled us. To this day, I can visualize this waterfall. Well, we finally made it to Johannesburg. It was quite the adventure. Somehow we managed to get a visa for South Africa. I spent about 2 weeks in Johannesburg resting up and living in the Indian community. There were a lot of Westerners, Black, and Indians interested. I was sent to Cape Town to prepare for Maraji's visit. In Cape Town, I stayed in the house of Nigel Fairhead. Nigel and his house were great to me. They lived in town in an old 17th century church. Cape Town was a beautiful place to live. The Cape is surrounded by the Indian and Atlantic Ocean. Nigel introduced me to a fellow surfer, Chris Parker. We became great friends. I hadn't spoken to him in over 40 years until recently. We carried our conversation as it was just yesterday. My days in Cape Town were spent in preparation for Marathi coming to visit. I would go to the university there and give talks about self-knowledge. The university and student body provided me with a classroom where I could speak. It's kind of funny, I was only 19 years old. The university was real receptive and curious. When Marathi came to give a talk at the university, the whole student body showed up. I had a great time with Marathi in Cape Town. There was only one other Westerner besides me. He was Gary Gerard, and he was traveling with him. I remember at one point I was in Raji's room. We were alone. He was talking about his father, Sri Marathi. I remember asking questions about his father. Marathi gave me this magazine that came from England. It contained some of his discourses in England. On the back page was this picture of him. He gave me this magazine and signed it, Sanchi Maharaj. On the back of the magazine, he drew a map of his old school in Dehradun, India. One day we went to the Cape of Good Hope. It was an incredible sight to behold the Atlantic and Indian Ocean merging together at one point. I remember at one point Marathi and the group had a race to get to the top of the stairs. I couldn't believe how fast he ran. He beat all of us by a long shot. I thought with all my training, I was fast. When I got to the top, I was breathing quite hard. Marathi was hardly breathing. I remember at one point a South African photographer took our picture. There was three of us, Marathi, his longtime bodyguard, Bihari Singh, and myself. We placed our arms on top of each other's shoulders, just like kids, and said cheese. It was a great moment. The following day, we flew back to Johannesburg. I remember Marathi passing out Nestle's white chocolates in the plane. We spent another 2 weeks in Johannesburg. Every day, we would have people from all of our race, colors, and creed come to the house. For some reason, the South African government didn't do anything about it. We had Westerners, blacks, and Indians all coming together. There was such a harmony. I flew with Marathi back to England. I remember the day after I got back, Marathi was speaking to a large group of people. I walked into their room and he stopped speaking and turned to me. He said, "Right now, my body is in England, but my soul is in South Africa." It was a remarkable statement. The South African people captured his heart. Chris Parker. I first met Chris in Cape Town, South Africa, over 45 years ago. We became instant friends. I introduced Chris to meditation. Now, if you like to meditate and you're a surfer, you're on the same wavelength. Chris and Nigel are like brothers to me, yet I haven't seen them since my time in Cape Town. In fact, it wasn't until recently did we hook up again. We discovered each other through Facebook. All three of us would have Skype sessions, Nigel in South Africa, Chris in Australia, and myself in good old Kansas. We would talk at times for 3 hours. Now that's a good use of technology. It seems just like yesterday. Now, I've known them for probably less than 6 months, yet the connection between all of us is like brothers. I find that fascinating. Sometime in June, I flew with Marathi back to the States. He was going on another tour. I went back to my hometown for about 2 weeks. When I returned, many people asked where I came from. They thought I was from Iran. I told all my family and friends about my experiences abroad. Many of them were quite interested. Marathi told colleague Kathleen and I to go to San Francisco to help set up for his visit. I took a train from Santa Barbara to San Francisco. Marathi gave a couple of programs at Berkeley. From there we went to Monterey. I remember one day Bill Patterson, Marathi, and myself were in this room. Marathi was telling joke after a joke. I thought I was going to die from laughter. I remember I tried to tell a joke, but I ruined the punchline. My next stage of the journey was in Colorado. I spent the summer there. Marathi had a 3-day program in a town called Montrose. I went there with a small group to help calm the town's fears. They were afraid that the stress school would be a rock and roll affair. They didn't want drugs or alcohol or a bunch of rowdy people in their town. We calmed the town's fears and the festival was a huge success. Many of the people from this town came to the program. There was excellent press coverage. I'll always remember the sunsets during the program. They're probably the most beautiful I've ever seen. During the first day of the program, my twin brother John came to the program. I was pleasantly surprised. He was living in Utah and somehow he ended up here. The next couple of days he received knowledge. He was quite blown away. One funny incident was that Miraji never knew I had a twin brother. Bihari wanted to play a trick on Miraji. He got us both together and said, "Miraji, look at this. This will blow your mind." He looked over our way and did a double take. He turned to us in amazement and said, "Wow, this is the first time God ever made a mistake. He made Richard twice." We all laughed. My brother and I spent many hours together meditating. Meditation was love at first sight. We were both having incredible experiences. It was great for my brother to have the same kind of experience. He admitted when I came back from my travels, he didn't know quite what to believe. I guess the taste is in the pudding. In early September, I went to Colorado, to Columbia for 2 months. I had a great time there. The people were very innocent. The countryside was gorgeous. I spent a lot of time meditating and speaking at programs. I went on tour with a woman named Gita. We went to the major cities, Bogota, Cali, and Barranquilla. I love Cali. Cali is in a valley and surrounded by mountains. The Cacao River flows to the eastern part of the city. The weather is almost the same year-round. The people were extremely friendly. I returned to the States and landed in Florida. I took a drive-away car from Miami to New York City. I remember one experience I fell asleep driving. I had no idea how long I fell asleep. It was quite the experience to wake up and find myself behind the wheel of a car. I got back to New York and spent a week there and then flew to India with my brother. Miraji had chartered 3 jumbo jets to fly to India. My brother and I were on the first one. I would like to thank one kind soul who paid for my plane ticket. Wherever you are, thank you. My brother and I helped with security. We had quite the life. During the day, we would sit outside the door and help with the security of Miraji's family. We would watch all kinds of interactions. During the night, my brother and I got into this routine. We tried to meditate all night long. We did this for about a month. The program came and went, and we all traveled to Premnagar, the site where I was the year before. This time, Premnagar was real crowded. There was probably over 1,000 people there. Fortunately, my brother and I were assigned to do security for Miraji. We stayed on top of the roof. Miraji's room was there. We had a great time. During the daytime, we would interact with Miraji, and at night we meditate all night long. I remember some incredible times. My brother and I were well liked by the people there. We developed strong friendships among the people. Meditation was quite the experience. I remember one night my brother and I went out and meditated next to the Ganges River. This was probably around midnight. As soon as we closed our eyes, both of us were swept away by this incredible white light. It was so bright I thought I was going to be blinded. The funny thing, my eyes were closed. This was such a love and bliss emanating from that light. After 1 hour, we were awakened by a man doing guard duty. He said there were many bandits in the air and we should go inside the compound. Well, that was the end of that experience. The only words I remember from Miraji was that one day he was talking about how the mind is time and the body is space. To go beyond time and space, we need meditation. Meditation is the key to go beyond time and space. I like that idea. Well, my brother and I returned to the States. We didn't get sick in India, but when we returned our bodies were frazzled. It took a few months to recover. We spent about 2 months in California. In early winter of '73, I went to Portland, Oregon. I had a great time in Portland. I was meditating a lot. I met a lot of real nice people. That summer, I drove from Portland, Oregon to Denver to New York City. My brother and I took an airplane ride to London. I remember one day that a real good friend of my brother came to the program. His name was John Slovsky. I told John about the experience when I first came back from India. He had no idea what I was talking about. John was practicing meditation. At one point, we went into this tent, closed our eyes, and just sailed away. John Slovsky and I had been friends from that day. I returned to New York and missed my ride back to Portland. Some of the directors at the time were really into politics. I guess with any organization, politics comes with the picture. I had a hard time with politics. Anyway, I missed my ride and decided to throw me out of the ashram. My brother was doing security for Maraji at the time, so I told him. He told Maraji, and Maraji said he was in charge. They had no right to throw me out. I had a feeling many of the leaders were jealous of us. We didn't strive for any power. I certainly didn't have anything to prove. I was simply enjoying my experience. The people loved my brother and I. Spaced out. I spent 2 years living in an ashram in Mexico during the 70s. One of my dear friends had a sister who said I was the most spaced out person she'd ever met. She never told me to my face, but my friend did several times. I thought it was cruel, and I still do. I guess things like this get stuffed inside. Back then, I didn't say anything. Here's what I would say today. I'm 21 years old. Since high school, I've traveled around the world, learned how to meditate, and sent to Cape Town, South Africa. The task was to prepare for Maraji's talk to the Cape Town University. I was sent solo from the group in Johannesburg. I daily gave talks to the university, where I first started to talk on the grounds of the university. Within a short period of time, they gave me a classroom to speak in. Around 5,000 people came to hear Maraji speak. Maraji was extremely grateful for the work I did. During that summer, Maraji was going to do an outdoor program in Montrose, Colorado. I was sent along with 4 others to talk to the city council and help alleviate their fears. They didn't want drugs and alcohol in a huge, insane atmosphere to take place. We calmed down their fears, and many of the residents of Montrose came to the program. Maraji sent me to Colombia, South America. He and I did a tour of the country and gave talks. This is all between 18 and 21. I look back and I'm amazed what I accomplished in such a short period of time. I had to use practical skills in order to pull this off. I admit I was spaced out. I really don't think an ashram environment is conducive to life. I think it hinders it. That's my perspective. I think living in an ashram is like hiding from the world. I look back at the 40 plus years and see what I have accomplished. Frankly, I think a lot of my spaced out was due to not having responsibilities like I had in South Africa, Montrose, California, and Colombia. Anyway, I'm proud of looking at myself and working on myself for all these years. I've been consciously trying to get rid of that junk that exists inside. You have helped me to clean out the closet. Thanks. There was once a time in my life when I had the chance to meditate as much as I wanted. All my worldly concerns such as food and a roof over my head was taken care of me. This was during the 70s. I remember waking up early in the morning to meditate for hours on end. It was an incredible experience. Each day it was surfing the inner wave. My whole being would be completely saturated with love and bliss and would just go deeper and deeper. At times I would be conscious of this human body. I would be in the presence of a universal consciousness of pure love. Each day my body and mind would take that experience and absorb it. Over time, I could simply just close my eyes and just be taken away. I wasn't afraid of death because each day I die and come back to life. I read books back then on the death experience, and my experience and those were definitely on the same boat. I did this not to escape from society, but I wanted to know the answers about life itself and consciousness. I had the time. I was in an environment if I could spend this time. I felt I was the luckiest human in the world. My whole being was radiating bliss and the power of love. I felt in one way like an astronaut going into space. I was exploring uncharted territories of consciousness. I saw that power and love exists inside of us, and we can tap into it consciously. We are much more than our bodies. At times, I experienced a power more powerful than any power in this physical universe. I saw a brilliant light that existed everywhere and was blinding. The light was love itself. I heard a sound hum like noise, which is completely full of harmony. My whole body was drenched in universal substance, which was nectar-like. My whole being was totally energized. It's so hard to describe this experience. I felt every human being on the face of this planet is looking for this. We're looking for the power of love in our lives. We go out and search for it every moment, and we can't find it. We need to look in the right place. I spent from 1971 to 79 daily meditating for hours on end. This gave me a foundation where I could take this experience and integrate it into this world. During this time, all of my friends were already finished college, had families already. I started 10 years later, but in my eyes it was perfect. I built a spiritual foundation in my life. I learned a lot about myself in this universe. I learned the most important thing, that love is the most important thing to hold on to. We're all here to help each other. None of us are greater. We're on the same boat. So let's help each other. We all have different gifts to offer this world. I have years of experience in going inside. I just want to share my experience with you. We are never alone. We have friends who are looking after us. For the past 10 years, I haven't meditated for hours on end. I have a family and a great job in Hawaii. I'm now bringing my experience into my daily life. I just want to be an example. I have nothing to prove or want to convince anybody. I'm just trying to live in harmony with this earth and universe. If you met me, you would have no idea who I am. I don't broadcast my ideas over. I believe in not forcing any ideas on anybody. I'm not here to convert anybody to a particular way of thought. I just simply live my life.
John Slovsky. My partner, John Slovsky, and I were both two ahead of our time. We developed in 1986 the first visual real estate program. Imagine doing a search for a house. Photos of all the houses would appear on the screen. Click on the house you like, and it would take you on a tour of the house. At that time, the real estate market was quite archaic. They said, we take all our customers to search for a house by a car. We said this tool can save you and your clients time by narrowing down the search. We told them that in the future, everyone, including your grandma, would be using this tool. Voila, the entire world's real estate market has tools just like this. We won awards at trade shows, but was too advanced for its time. My dear friend John Slovsky and I developed On Maui Com in 1996. It was quite revolutionary for its time. John did all the graphics for the site. Since then, John has been on the forefront of graphic design. Check out Slovsky.com. We developed 3 virtual towns in Maui, Makua, Paia, and Lahaina. Imagine back then, we didn't have Google walkthroughs of towns. John and I developed something similar to what we have today. For example, I took photos of the towns in Maui. John then stitched together the photos. Back then, Vermo, virtual reality markup language, was just taken off. By the way, it didn't make it. We created virtual walkthroughs of these towns. You can stroll down the street and go into surfboard shops and art galleries. You can even buy things. Years later, We have Google Maps, where instead of a person walking down the street, they have this car with a built-in camera that could capture an image of our towns in minutes. John was also a surfer. John also loved to meditate. John loved to be creative. What else can I say? We're both peas in a pod. I have known John since 1972. He was a great friend to my brother John. I haven't seen John in many moons. He is still dear to my heart. We all have such incredible friends on this journey of life. I feel so fortunate meeting John.
Katharina Parsons Lamosa. When I was in India, the Indians in general had a whole different idea on the style of cooking. Their concept was to cook a meal for the Lord. Imagine all the care, love, and kindness you would put into the food. Cooking would become an art and devotion. This food would then be presented, blessed, and served to your family and friends. I like that idea. Fast forward to the present. We have cooking shows like Chopped, where they have 20 minutes to cook a dish. They hurry around the kitchen and slap together a dish to be judged by. The audience, including myself, is entertained by that. Yet, are they conscious? All their frustrations about time, the rushing around, competition between competitors, and the anger goes into the food. How about fast food restaurants like Burger King? This is a profit-driven company. Do they cook with a concept of cooking the meal for the Lord? You can answer that question yourself. Now, I live in New York City for a few years. This is where I met Katharina. Katharina embodies the spirit of devotion to her life, her family, and to her cooking. I was still learning how to cook Indian food, and she was my mentor. To this day, she's been an inspiration in my life. She taught me the fine details of Indian cooking. Many cooks hide their knowledge, but Katharina didn't hide anything. Some people are humble in their nature, and she definitely was. She was kind and sweet to everyone. She loved life and the adventures that came along the way. I love to see the care she put into her family life. I remember that one time Katharina and I did a 15-course Indian feast for a fundraiser. About 200 people came. We had a few volunteers and it took us around 3 days to cook. It was so much fun. Katharina took time off from her family. I love how she taught. It was so easygoing. I learn more when I'm relaxed. The wisdom just soaks within. To this day, I give tribute to Katharina. She helped bring my cooking level and awareness to a higher level. Thanks, Katharina, for being my friend. It's been over 30 years since we have seen each other, yet the bond of friendship can never be broken. Kali Rodriguez. I first met Kali in India in 1971. We hitchhiked with Kathleen Cook and Tess Davies from Kenya to South Africa. To this day, I wonder, why didn't we fly? But it was an incredible adventure. Read the chapter Travels in Africa. I first learned how to cook Indian food from Kali. She at various times became Raji's cook. Indian food at that time was very exotic and different. Kali taught me the ropes. She taught me the main concepts. I remember Kali teaching me how to cook dal. Dal is one of my favorite comfort foods. There's a step where you get a cast iron pan, heat up some ghee, clarified butter, and place cumin seeds in the pan. The cumin seeds will begin to pop, and the room will be filled with this incredible smell of the roasted cumin seeds. You then add chopped onions, garlic, tomatoes, ginger, and dried chili peppers. This step is called making the chunk. You saute this until the mixture turns golden brown. When it does, this mixture is poured into the dough and makes this incredibly sizzling sound. You have to be careful to use the lid to cover the dough so you won't get burned. Anyway, I have probably made this hundreds of times and I never duplicated that sound. Now I'm a good Indian cook, but Kali has taken it to a higher level. I still remember that sizzling sound in my mind. Kali has a love and adventure for life. She was a great travel partner. She was easygoing and had a great attitude. It was an amazing journey. Kali's grandfather was president of Mexico at some time. Her mom danced with Esther Williams. I stayed at Kali's mom's house in the 70s, and she was a great host. I could see in Kali a lot of her mom. This house was at the tip of Baja. At that time, this part of Baja was relatively unknown, not today. Kali had a great singing voice. She played the guitar and sang these incredible songs. I feel meditation brings the soul to the surface. When she sang, I could feel the sweetness coming from within her. When I think about Kali, I can hear her singing. She had this haunting effect, much like the Irish singers, such as Enya. Music, if done properly, is a manifestation coming from God. I have nothing but great memories of Kali. She will always be dear to my heart. Kathleen Cook, aka Cookie. I first met Kathleen, aka Cookie, in Premigar Auckland in 1971. I was only 18 years old. Kathleen told me a beautiful story that occurred only a few months previously. Somehow, she bumped into Maraji and Bihari Singh in the streets of San Francisco. Maraji was giving a talk there. Somehow the details are fuzzy. They asked Cookie if she could drive them to Los Angeles. So she borrows a beat-up Volkswagen and had the adventures of her life. Maraji was only 13 years old at that time. Cookie was one of my traveling partners on the journeys in Africa. She remembers the time when taking a train from New Delhi to Bombay, now called Mumbai. The trains were super dirty. I think I had to sleep on the dirty floor. We reached our destination, and we all realized that no one had the directions. I was quite young and naive. Maybe or maybe not. I had no fear. We get in this taxi and the driver says, "Well, where do you want to go?" And I said, "I'll direct you there." So we drive for about 45 minutes. I'm getting signals to turn left and turn right. At some point, I tell the driver to stop. We get out of the car, knock on the door, and guess who's inside? Maraji and Bihari Singh. At that time, we really didn't think anything about it. We had faith. At the same time, meditation helps to bring up the subconscious where events like this can happen. Well, we were in Bombay one day. I was in Maraji's room when all of a sudden he got off his bed, stood up, and started to wave his hands toward one of his initiators, Ashokanand. The hair on his whole body stood up. It looked like he put his hand in a light socket. He was yelling, "Please, Maraji, stop it." After about 10 seconds, Maraji's hand fell to the side, and Ashokanand was back to normal. Being that 18-year-old kid that I was, I said, "Hey Maraji, you want to zap him once more?" Maraji said sure, and for just a fraction of a second, he raised his hands and put electricity back into him. Maraji was electrocuting him. We all laughed. This is my first time that I spent close time with Maraji. Cookie and Kali were present in the room. It was so beautiful to play with Maraji, at the same time have a great respect for him. Before we left to Kenya, Maraji asked us if we wanted any holy water. Holy water is a custom in India where the master places his foot in water. I had only a canteen, and Maraji placed his foot inside of the canteen. We all laughed. The next day we headed out for Kenya. On board the plane was Kali, Kathleen, and Tess. These were the 3 girls I traveled with from New Delhi. On board the plane, we drank the water from the canteen. All of us got rip-roaring drunk. I'd been drunk prior to that once or twice, but this was a drunk of joy. We all somehow managed to saunter off the plane. We spent a few days in Nairobi. Tess's parents lived on the outskirts of town. Kenya was an incredible country, part of it like England. It was so much fun traveling with Cookie. We had hardships along the journey, but it didn't bother us. I can't imagine hitchhiking through Africa today. We made it to South Africa. We spent a few weeks in Johannesburg, and then Cookie was sent to Durban, and I was sent to Cape Town to prepare for Maraji's visit. As Maraji was leaving Africa, he told Cookie, Kali, and I to help in his coming to San Francisco. I flew with Maraji back to England. I remember the day after I got back, Maraji was speaking to a large group of people. I walked into their room, and he stopped speaking and turned to me. He said, "Right now, my body is in England, but my soul is in South Africa." It was a remarkable statement. The South African people captured his heart. I stayed a few weeks at home, and then I took the Amtrak train from LA to San Francisco with Kali. We go by the Hollister Ranch, and floods of memories come up. We arrived in San Francisco and catch up with Cookie. Maraji came and did a program at the University of Berkeley. I saw Cookie on and off throughout the years. She always inspired me. She loves to meditate. She also became an exceptional chef. She cooked for many people in Hollywood. I didn't know that until years later. My daughter, Aliyah, lives in Ashland, Oregon. And we visit her about twice a year. Well, guess who moved to Ashland? Yep, Kathleen Cook. We have seen each other a few times in the past few years. I've taken her to an Indian restaurant a few times, and she came to my birthday party at a Mexican restaurant on Christmas Eve. My mom had Mexican food the night I was born, and it's a family tradition. It's always a delight of being with Cookie. She lights up the room. I love her laugh. I can hear her soul coming out. Cookie keeps up in the current events in the world, so conversation can be quite lively. We talk about old times and how fortunate we are. I'm so glad that she is a web in my life. Cookie, from the bottom of my heart, thanks for all you do.
David Humphrey. I first met David when I was 18 years old. We were both in India in an ashram named Premnagar. We became instant friends. This is where the thread of life ties us together. A year later, I introduced my brother John to David. They became instant friends. Many people think that all of us are brothers. David has carried on the tradition of being a world-class jeweler. The following is an excerpt from an article by Robert Weldon for Professional Jeweler magazine. Years ago, before he had a storefront, Humphrey quietly sold ancient treasures and secret and select gemstones to a few chosen customers in Los Angeles. During this time, he would visit Richard T. Litcote, chairman of the Geological Institute of America, and a friend, mentor, and inspiration. GIS staffers recall looking forward to Humphrey's visits and the treasures that would tumble from his pockets one by one. An Art Deco, ice pin, a magnificent parabola tourmaline. His store today captures that same sense of mystery and wonder. David believes in the power of connections and started to establish them long before he opened his store. In the past 2 decades, he has forged friendships and business relationships with many people, including museum curators and auction house directors, with whom he can share information about ancient pieces he buys or sells. These people are scholars, consumer and experts with high standards, he says. He also lists a number of artists in the musical and theatrical fields as his friends and clients. Humphrey prefers to keep the names quiet and prides himself on creating a comfortable atmosphere for everyone in which to experience the treasures he has to offer. Flamboyance is not something David Humphrey is comfortable with, yet his jewelry has graced actresses and music superstars at such high-profile events at the Academy Awards. The above comments truly reflects David's nature. He simply smiles at life. He has been meditating for 47 years. He truly enjoys the gift of life. Now to the next step in the web of life. Around 1982, I live in Miami Beach. My brother John introduces me to Jerry Whitesides. Jerry is also a surfer. 10 years later, he is married to David's ex-wife. When I moved back to California, I would go to Oxnard and surf with my brother and Jerry. David only lived a few blocks away in the Palisades. I'm living next door to the Self-Realization Fellowship Center. This is a meditation center opened by Paramahansa Yogananda in the 1950s. Well, our family moved to Miami in 1991. Jerry lived on the Big Island with his wife Nina, who was David's ex-wife. Some people love resorts to chill out. Jerry was renting a resort. For around $1,000 a month, he got an incredible deal to rent this gorgeous house and property. Imagine on his property was 2 pools, a saltwater pool and a freshwater pool. Right next door was a famous surf spot called Lyman's. We could paddle out right from his house into the lineup. The wave was a left point break where you can get incredible rides. Usually at unknown spots, it takes time to become familiar with the fellow surfers. Jerry introduced me to them, and I got to have some incredible waves come my way. My family slept outside on the porch, where there's a comfortable bed. The sound of the ocean would be heard the entire night. This is paradise. Nina and my wife Barbara become instant friends. Jerry and his family took us twice to the Waipio Valley. To get to the valley, you have to take an extremely steep road down to the valley. It was one of the steepest roads I ever seen. Here's an expert from the website, The Most Dangerous Roads in America. Waipio Valley Road is a short, steep road in the Big Island of Hawaii, restricted to 4x4s. It is the steepest road of its length in the United States. The road is steep enough to destroy brakes on the way down, with some 45% grade sections. The road is difficult, and it's a nightmare in the wet or dark or both. It links Waipio Overlook at the western end of Honokaya Waipio Road, State Route 240, down into the Waipio Valley. In the Hamaka district, while the road is now paved and only about 3/4 mile long, the 25% average grade, said to be up to 45% at some points, takes the road down about 900 feet down to the valley floor. It's steep enough to destroy brakes on the way down and stall engines on the way up. The road is therefore restricted to 4x4s, which you need anyway to navigate the unpaved roads on the valley floor. and hikers with strong legs. This road is not for the faint of heart. It is a 45-degree angle all the way down, and the only way to make it is with the four-wheel drive in low gear. It is a single-lane road, and folks going down have to yield to folks coming up. I will never forget the great hospitality of the Whitesides family. Jerry passed away about 10 years ago. Rest in peace, Jerry. I will never forget you and the incredible times we had together. You touched many people's hearts. Our journeys go on. I give my love and gratitude to David and the Whitesides family. John Roberts. I first met John through my friend Buddy Owens. I had just returned home from my journeys around the world. Buddy was living with some friends where I became friends to them. They all learned how to meditate. John was an incredible person to be around. He lived life to its fullest. He had quite the humble and loving demeanor. John smiled at life. Once again, the web of life connects us all. One of John's roommates is Bob Haxton, who 30 years later is living in Ashland, Oregon. We had the same spiritual path with two identical teachers. John and I decided to take a surf trip to Mexico. John had this incredible VW camper. John just bought the Wings' first album, and we play it over and over. We drove from California to Mazatlan. We spent a day or two there and traveled to San Blas. San Blas is famous for Matachin Bay. This can be the longest wave to ride in North America. On a good day, you can ride a wave for over a mile. I have never seen that yet. I see the potential. I've ridden tiny waves for probably a quarter of a mile. John and I surfed at this river mouth just outside of town. It was always consistent. We had it to ourselves. Great fun lefts were had by all. We continued our drive to Puerto Escondido. I was there a year before, but I had no surfboard. This surf spot is for experts only. The waves can be huge. Even on a small day, the waves break extremely hard and violent. We got some incredible waves. Back then, it was an unknown surf destination. Today, the entire world knows of this surf spot. John was a great surf partner. We definitely had adventures along the way. Our goal was to go to Central America. One night, while we were sleeping, someone stole John's surfboards. We drove on a dusty dirt road to Oaxaca and visited Malti Alba, a famous pre-Columbian archaeological site. We also visited the Tule tree. It's believed the tree is about 2,000 years old. Local legend holds that the tree was planted 1,400 years ago by a priest of the Aztec storm god. According to National Geographic, it's an inspiration for an annual festival in Oaxaca, celebrated on the second Monday of October. We spent a few days there and drove to Mexico City. I lived there for two years. Our house was across the street from Chapultepec Park. I enjoyed seeing my Mexican friends. They welcomed John and I into their household. I will always cherish my time with John. Last time I saw him was 10 years ago in Ashland, Oregon.
Joe Lopez. I first met Joe in India. Joe at the time was the owner of a dojo in New York City. He started his school in the 60s. Joe and his students provided security for Marathi at the Festival of Montrose. I was always impressed by Joe's demeanor. He was an incredible martial artist, and he had a heart of gold. He was kind and considerate towards others. He embodied the spirit of martial artists throughout history. When I lived in New York, Joe told me the story about how he got involved in Tai Chi and Qigong. One day he met a Tai Chi master in the early 70s. The master says, "Hit me in the stomach as hard as you can." Joe says, "I won't do that, I could kill you." The master says, "No, you won't." So Joe hits the masters and nothing happens. The master says, "Now it's my turn." The master doesn't even touch Joe. With his hands, sends energy through them and sends Joe crashing into a wall. That's how Joe gets introduced to Tai Chi and Qigong. He has been practicing ever since. Joe moved to Santa Monica in the 80s. He has taught classes at a park for over 30 years. Joe has combined meditation and his martial art practice to refine himself for over 50 years. I like that. I just found out I was writing this on May 7th that today is Joe's birthday. I haven't seen or spoken to Joe in over 30 years. Happy birthday, Joe. Mark and Geraldine Lornhurst. I first met Mark at the festival in Montrose. He was only around 15 or 16 years old at the time. Mark came with his friend Joe Lopez. He helped with the security at the festival. Both my brother and I bonded with Mark. We have been friends ever since. Both my brother and I have both stayed for an extended time at Mark's family house during the 70s. His parents made us a part of their family. I still remember a dish that Mark made for dinner. It was broccoli and shredded Jarlsberg cheese. It was delicious. Mark was one of those people who helped me get involved in computers. At that time, he was going to school and he was studying computer science. Both Mark and I lived for a short time in the ashram in New York. Mark's parents were smart enough to say, "We will support you in your studies so you can get a degree." Wise choice. I saw Mark on and off during the 80s. In 1982, I went to New York City for a business trip and stayed at their house for a week. One morning, I made the kids, Rachel and Christopher, pancakes. 35 years later, whenever my name is mentioned, Rachel speaks about my pancakes. Mark is like a brother to my brother and I. We have known him for around 46 years. Mark is kind and extremely generous. I would say he has a heart of gold. I first met Geraldine in New York City in 1976. I knew a few of her friends. Mark's mom was a psychologist. One of her best friends was also a psychologist. Geraldine was mentored by her, and over time, she was an incredible counselor. She had the insight from her practice of meditation and a keen sense of intuition to her clients. She eventually had clients all throughout the States. Geraldine helped me when my marriage broke up. She taught there are two sides of the stories. Don't be a victim and learn a lesson from it. She also taught to take out the weeds in your own garden. Another wise advice. Mark and Geraldine have been together for over 40 years. They have been friends of mine for many years. I truly treasure them. They are one of my jewels in life. Words truly can't describe the love I have for the both of them. My first girlfriend. Before I met Anna Carney, I never had a true girlfriend. During my high school years, I had a hard time with the way we operate in society. For example, many of my friends would see a beautiful girl and say, "Wow, I wish I could get laid by her." They would compliment a girl by her breast size or judge someone who was overweight. I guess I saw life different as my friends. I knew this life was sacred. I knew that to know God wasn't to go to church on Sunday for an hour, then the rest of the week you can do anything you want. Knowing God isn't a token. You just don't unconsciously go through the motion. It's a moment by moment, day by day, year by year affair. At times, I was quite lonely in high school. All my friends had girlfriends, yet I never did. Girls liked me, but nothing ever developed. I think I only went on 2 dates in high school. I realized that loneliness was my soul was calling out to me. At times, it seemed something external will fill the loneliness, but it never will. The cup must be filled from within. Being young, I didn't know that. I first met Anna in an ashram in Mexico City. She was from Ireland. Anna definitely caught my attention. She was on the same wavelength as me. She loved to meditate. She was fun and loved adventure and life. Anna had a great heart and soul. She was funny, she was smart, and she had wisdom. Also, she loved to cook. Anna was kind. She had the maturity and understanding that life is sacred. So over time, we fell in love. I remember once I needed to renew my visa for Mexico. Anna and I took a train to Guatemala. I still remember at the border crossing, this American boy around 10 years old with a beautiful parrot on his shoulder. My first thought was this boy already knows about life. I can sense that traveling was his education. We spent a week or 2 in Guatemala. I always will remember Lake Aquilan. What a beautiful lake. The lake is surrounded by mountains and volcanoes. I love the Mayan people. They were short. Most of them were under 5 feet tall. Most of all, they were happy and content. They came from an incredible lineage. The Mayans at some point in time developed calendars that made the Gregorian calendar look primitive. Yet, we think they were ignorant and lived in the Stone Age. Anna and I visited Kali's mom. She had a house in Baja California. Along the way, we stopped off at Matishim Bay. This bay was well known since the 60s. On a good day, you could ride away for almost a mile. The only drawback is at sunset and sunrise, the Noceans came out by the millions. One day we took a walk up the point, past the bay. At some point, both of us realized that we should turn around. We couldn't quite pinpoint it. We turned around and started to walk back to Matishim Bay. Well, we were right to turn around. As soon as we were walking, a bullet whizzed so close we could hear it. We didn't turn around, but slowly walked away. At some point, Anna and I thought we were going to get married. It is a custom in Ireland that the man asks the father's daughter for his hand in marriage. So I did. Anna went back to Ireland to visit her family. We were going to meet in Toronto, Canada in a month. I remember Anna comes to Toronto and we're staying at this elderly couple's house. She made this dumpling soup that I still remember today. It was the best dumplings I ever had. We met Richard from White Rock, British Columbia. He was driving back home and said we could travel with him if we liked. We did. I remember traveling at night and an avalanche occurred as we were passing. We were at the right place and right time. If we were off by 30 seconds, we would have been covered in snow. We ran into Mahatma Rajaswar and Bill Patterson. They were going to do a TV interview and asked us if we wanted to come. We spent a few days there. Bill gave me a copy of a book about Milarepa. He was Tibet's greatest yogi. The Kagyu lineage still exists today, and in fact in Ashland, Oregon, there is a beautiful temple that comes from the Kagyu lineage. Bill unfortunately died about 10 years ago. He was well known for his kindness. We made it to British Columbia. We stayed at Dr. Michael Clapper's house. He has been on the cutting edge of health for over 40 years. Mahatma Rajaswar and Bill Patterson came to visit our house. We made this incredible Indian meal for Canada's Thanksgiving. Bill showed me how to put chapatis in the oven to puff up. It was a beautiful technique. Anna and I moved to White Rock. It's right on the border of U.S. and Canada. It borders Semiahmoo Bay. I remember walking home with Anna late at night when it was snowing. It was so peaceful. I used to play chess with the elderly man next door. He loved my company. Anna and I went to Vancouver Island with a friend of mine named Richard. He wanted to try out surfing. We went to Wreck Beach. The waves were quite fun. The water was cold. A friend of ours had a nice sauna that we used to heat up. At some point, Anna decides to move to Nelson, British Columbia. Quite frankly, I felt lost for a while. I really didn't have the maturity and life experience to cope with this. You can't put your happiness and love into someone else without having that inside of you. Nobody can fill you up. I learned that you can't hold on to something forever. Everything changes. Our relationship was never the same. I spent about 6 months in Nelson, British Columbia. We stayed in a beautiful cabin built from a friend of ours. Bill Scholl, his wife and son lived there. Nelson was an incredible place. I loved the town and people. Many of the folks were involved in meditation in one way or another. The first time I ever saw fireflies was in Nelson. I was captivated by the flashing of the lights. We love going to Nelson's hot springs. It's a natural hot springs for many different temperature pools. It was a great place to go and relax with your friends. Back then, it was real cheap in getting in. One of my favorite moments was going to Kootenay Bay for a 3-day adventure with Anna. We took this ferry to this island. I remember having French bread and bread tea along with a little white wine. The ferry ride was gorgeous. Mountains were all around the lake and the water was crystal clear. During my stay in Nelson, I met someone who went to the J. Victor Scheer Academy of Natural Healing in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I decided to move there. Anna moved to Gainesville, Florida. We met up in California about a year later. Anna was still living in Florida. I was still living in New Mexico. I introduced Anna to my mom and dad. I remember my dad made homemade gazpacho soup. It was served cold. Anna and I made an Indian meal for my mom. During this trip, Anna and I went by car to Nevada City to visit my grandmother Josie. I love my grandmother. That was the last time I ever saw her. Anna and I never got together. The last time I saw her was over 30 years ago. We had lunch at a Chinese restaurant in Miami Beach. I remember having wonton soup. I have fond memories of Anna. Anna has been happily married since 1997. I'm happy that she has found someone special in her life. Thanks, Anna, for being a part of my life.
I just learned a few days ago that Mahatma Rajaswar passed on. Joan After was kind to post on Facebook. Rajaswar was loved by thousands of people. He had a great heart. He was kind, compassionate, and full of love. In his early days, he was a great judge to the Indian. He was a beacon of light to all. People from all around the world have written about their love for the man. He was wise and practiced what he preached. Rajaswar was extremely funny and loved to laugh. His most famous quote was, "A meeting without eating is cheating." To this day, there are probably thousands of people who remember his quoting this. I remember one Canada's Thanksgiving Day when he came to cook for around 6 people. He was an incredible cook. I will never forget the laughter and sense of family among us. Everyone would consider him as a friend. He had a way to make you feel good about yourself. I look back and we were all quite young and naive.
yet he had a way to embrace all around him in kindness. Kindness is sort of lost in the world today, yet I love the theory that death is the scattering of ashes throughout the universe. This means the true essence of Rajaswar exists inside of us. His body may be gone, yet his soul is eternal. He has gone back to the source of all. Our sweet memories of him will live forever until we meet again.
Rest in peace, Bihari Singh. Joan Apter posted this on Facebook a few days ago. Bihari Singh passed away peacefully in Jaipur at 2:30 p.m. on March 5th, 2020. His funeral procession will take place on March 6th at his birthplace, Ram Singh Kai Dihan, near Koi, Patali. I met Bihariji in 1969 in Dehradun, India, when I first knocked at the door of Prem Rawat's residence. He traveled to the west with Prem in 1971. We called him Hanuman because of his great love and his great strength. He was almost 90 years old. Fly free, dear Bihari. Feel our love with you. Update. Just got this YouTube interview of Bihari. Super powerful. The following is Richard's experience with Bihari Singh. When I was in India, the Indians in general had a whole different idea of the style of cooking. Their concept was to cook a meal for the Lord. Imagine all the care, love, and kindness you would put into the food. Cooking would become an art and devotion. This food would then be presented, blessed, and served to your family and friends. I love that idea. Fast forward to the present, we have cooking shows like Chopped, where they have 20 minutes to cook a dish. They go around in the kitchen and slap together a dish to be judged by. The audience, including myself, isn't entertained by that. Yet, are they conscious? Are there frustrations about time, the rushing around, competition between competitors, and the anger that goes into the food? How about fast food restaurants like Burger King? This is a profit-driven company. Do they cook with the concept of cooking the meal for the Lord? You can answer that question yourself. Bihari Singh brought this incredible picture, practice, to the West. From the very beginning, when Prem first came to the West, he helped teach many different Westerners to Indian cooking and the philosophy of cooking from love. I had the joy watching him cook in India, South Africa, and the United States. He was a master in the kitchen. I know a few of his students, and boy, can they ever cook. I would rather have a meal cooked by them than any professional chef in the world. Here's some of my favorite moments with Bihar. During the first day of the program, my twin brother John came to the program. I was pleasantly surprised. He was living in Utah, and somehow he ended up here. In the next couple of days, he received knowledge. He was quite blown away. One funny incident was that Prem never knew I had a twin brother. Bihari wanted to play a trick on Prem. He got us both together and said, "Prem, look at this. This will blow your mind." He looked over and did a double take. He turned to us in amazement and said, "Wow, this is the first time God ever made a mistake. He made Richard twice." We all laughed. One day, we went to the Cape of Good Hope. It was an incredible sight to behold the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean merging at one point. I remember at one point Prem and the group had a race to get to the top of the stairs. I couldn't believe how fast he ran. He beat us all by a long shot. I thought with all my training I was fast. When I got to the top, I was breathing quite hard. Prem was hardly breathing. I remember at one point a South African photographer took our picture. There were three of us: Prem, his longtime bodyguard Bihari Singh, and myself. We placed our arms on the top of each shoulder, just like kids, and said, "Cheese." It was a great moment. Bihar had a twinkle in his eyes. He was saying non-verbally, "Wow, bet you will never forget this in your life." This was 48 years ago. During the 80s, I lived in Miami Beach. Alex Shea, Bihar, and I would play tennis a lot. Many times he would go to Bihari's house and cook incredible Indian food. We would first watch a Bollywood movie. We had so much fun. I will never forget it. I read on Facebook hundreds of people talking about their love for Bihari. Each one was touched by him. He literally had thousands of friends all around the world. Rest in peace, Bihari. You are home with your beloved swan.
More spiritual friends. Joan Apter. Wow, Joan has 4,977 friends on Facebook. I first met Joan when I was 18 in India. Joan truly loves life and loves to meditate. I haven't seen her in over 40 years. Yet, every year on Facebook, she sends me an incredible birthday card. Joan is a legend around the world. You may not have known her, but she is instrumental in helping so many people in discovering their true nature. I love spending time with her. Keep on writing those Facebook posts. Mark Putnam. I first met Mark in Bethesda, Maryland in 1977. Mark has a keen sense of humor and a great laugh. Of course, he loves to meditate. I love to read his posts on Facebook. Nancy Brown. I first met Nancy in Denver in 1972. Always remember the great times we had together. Fast forward 30 years, and she is living in the same town, Pacific Palisades. It was a great time reconnecting. Since then, she lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, my old stomping grounds in the 70s. I will always treasure such a unique person. Gwen Harrington. I first met Gwen in the 70s. Here's another web that ties us together. Gwen's best friend on the Big Island is married to Eric Weiner, who I have known since junior high school. What a small world. Gwen is also a great friend of Kali, who I had many incredible adventures with. I have many fond memories of Gwen. Aloha, sending love to you and the Weiners. Richard Sand. Richard is a great friend to my brother John and Honolulu. They have known each other since the 70s. Recently, they had a chance to spend time together after many years. Richard definitely thinks outside of the box. He has been teaching and learning shamanic wisdom for many years. Thanks, Richard, for the friendship we have shared. William Fairchild. Rest in peace, Billy. Billy was an incredible character in life. Thousands of people knew about Billy. He had quite the sense of humor. Billy loved life, and life loved Billy. He had quite the heart. I spent many moments in various parts of the States with Billy. Tim Galloway. Here's what an article described about Tim Galloway. The inner game of everything. Why is it a 4-decade-old tennis book still a self-help sensation? A Harvard English major wrote The Inner Game of Tennis in 1972. A million copies later, its ideas are some of the most influential in sports and beyond, taken seriously by actors, politicians, and even sex researchers. What's its secret? Maybe there is no secret. I first met Tim in India in 1971. I was 18 years old, just a kid. With his meditation practice, Tim had the insight to write this book and launch him into a highly successful career. In the 70s, I spent some time with Tim. He was always an inspiration to be around. Arthur Brigham. I first met Arthur in the 70s in Denver, Colorado. I haven't seen him in many years. In the last 7 years, we have reconnected through Facebook. I love to see that he is married and has a family. He lives in Japan. We both love to meditate. When he talks about his family, I can see it brings him such pleasure to his life. Doug Bernard. I first met Doug in Portland, Oregon in 1973. I really liked him. I remember that he asked me if the world would be around in the year 2000. I said no. Thank God I was wrong. Doug is married to Mary Doors, who I spent time with in Florida. Once again, the thread of life that ties us all together. Carol Scher. I first met Carol in Portland, Oregon in 1973. As you can see, she has bright red hair. Carol was a delight to be around. She sparkled life all around. She is always in a good mood. I treasure my time with her. About the Rainbow Gypsies. In 1969, a band of self-styled hippie gypsies clad in rainbow rags and waving their freak flag high danced their way around the world from their homes in America to an ashram on the banks of the Ganges. Set in the psychedelic 60s, the Rainbow Gypsies is a unique journey that simply could not be made today. Lofar and Ricardo de Gaudel. They were one of the main characters in the Rainbow Gypsies. I first met Lofar and Ricardo in India in 1971. They were part of the Rainbow Gypsies. They were incredible dancers and danced around the world. Both of them learned how to meditate and still practice today. I have many fond memories of them. They were older than I was. I remember a great party I attended in Miami Beach in the mid-80s. Their house was on the beach. Great time for all. Both of them love the adventures of life. Love you guys. David and Sally Richmond. David recently wrote a book on Wilt Chamberlain. When he was around 10 years old, he stayed in his house for a year. David wrote an exceptional and wise book about him. I never knew the depth of Wilt's wisdom. David and I had a great friend in common, Richie Ingley. Sending my love to the Richmond family. It's been many moons since I have seen you. Charles Cameron. I first met Charles in India in 1971. He was from England. He graduated from Cambridge. His passion was writing and poetry. Charles had a great sense of humor. You could say it was almost dry, British style. I have many fond memories of them. He was a great public speaker and storyteller. Joram Weiss. I have known Joram for many years. He is very inspirational to me. Each year on my birthday, he would message me a birthday greeting. Here's an example of the latest one. Happy birthday, dear Richard. There's a synchronicity in this universe. With each cycle around the sun, your heart rises with more beauty, deeper wisdom, and ever sweeter love. May the richness of your heart expand every space in your life and light them all up with abundance of your gifts and your kindness. Happy birthday to you, Joram. Randy Marder. I first met Randy in LA and then in India. My brother John and I have many great memories of them. He loves life. Randy loves to restore old houses. He also loves to meditate. My heart goes out to Randy and his family. Jock Sandos. I first met Jock in India in 1971. He comes from Switzerland and has a brilliant family. His uncle Albert discovered LSD in Sandos' labs in 1939. Jock was a filmmaker. I had many incredible times with him. He was a giant for his time, extremely progressive in his thinking. New York friends. Kareem Fabius. I first met Kareem in 1977. Kareem definitely enjoys life to the fullest. I have many great memories of her. Her best friend at the time was Fran Matos. I used to take lunch breaks with Fran when she worked for either CBS or NBC. She worked for a powerful executive at that time. We would go to a huge church and meditate. I loved her mom. I haven't talked to Fran in many years. Anyone know where she is? Spruce Drury. Spruce was another person who the web of life binds us together. I knew her during the 70s Fast forward 30 years, and she is on several conference calls with my brother John. It's a small world. I love reading her posts. George Mershon. George was another person who had many close friends of mine. There were many Latin people who loved to meditate. George was one of them. Fast forward 40 years, and George and I are on Facebook. George is one of the few people who constantly responds to my posts. Tugomor Mati. Tugomor originally came from Russia many moons ago. He was an incredible concert pianist. As I remember, he defected while on tour. Tugomor loves to meditate. Fast forward 40 years ago, I'm seeing his life once again on Facebook. Richie Niles and Linda Pollock. As I remember, they were peas in a pod. They were incredible singers together. Both of them had an incredible sense of humor. I remember the audience laughing and clapping during many of their songs. Great hearts. I still read their Facebook posts 40 years later. Linda Gross. I first met Linda in New York in the mid-70s. She was learning how to meditate. Fast forward 40 plus years, she still loves to meditate. I feel the web of life tying us together through the years. We may have not seen each other many years, but the thread never gets severed. Steve O'Neill. Rest in peace, Steve. You led life to the fullest. My brother John and Hanley had great memories of your visit to Oxnard in the 70s. You were a great roommate. I will never forget your humor and laughter. Ira Woods. Ira was another person who during the 70s and early 80s was in my area of life. We weren't friends per se, yet we both loved to meditate. Ira has the passion of life. Fast forward 40 years, and I read how Ira helped his wife leave this planet in dignity. It was a tremendous and heartwarming story. It showed the love that he has inside. John Campbell. John worked in the food co-op in Queens. Many of my friends worked there. John knew the open-air markets in Brooklyn like nobody else. I have many fond memories of John. For a while, we lived in the same house. Susan Hubley. Wow, Susan Hubley. She was an inspiration to me. Susan was extremely kind to all. That was her nature. Combine that with meditation, and you become super kind. Karen, if you read my book on kindness, this is probably one of the best traits to have. I read with joy her Facebook post. We haven't seen each other in 30 years. Stuart Harfman. Stuart was amazing at playing the keyboards and singing back in the 70s. Fast forward 40 years, and he's still amazing. I love his Facebook photo of his. It sums it up. His music comes from the universe. Yes, Stuart loves to meditate. Mickey Rotel. Mickey was definitely a character. He had a heart of gold. I have many fond memories of them. He worked in the film industry for many years. He loves to meditate. Fast forward 40 years, and I'm reading his Facebook post. Great person to know. Steve Soffer. I went to Steve's house for dinner in 1978. I still remember clear as day after dinner, Steve and I go into the kitchen. He makes a smoothie out of soybean ice cream. Steve and I are on the same wavelength in life. We both love to meditate. Steve has been practicing preventive medicine since the 70s. Here's a photo from one of his posts. Thanks, Steve, for you and Kathy being in my life. Both of you are inspiration. Richard, I like that. Stephen, thought you might. Picture of Santa Claus meditating.
Larry Lusbader. The more I know Larry, the more I can see the genius in him. I first met Larry in New York City. He invited me to stay at his house. I had another offer. Fast forward 40 years, and I'm reading his Facebook post. He loves to meditate. Larry truly enjoys life. He has a thirst to discover his true nature. Keep on laughing, Larry. Tom Gannon. Tom and I lived in the same house for a while. He was an incredible guitar player and singer. He has a heart of gold. When I read his Facebook post, I can tell he has a deep love for all. Great person, great heart. Yes, he loves to meditate. Dennis Marciniak. I first met Dennis in New York City. I stayed at his house for a while. I learned that he had a professional football tryout for the LA Rams in the early 70s. Dennis was extremely practical and at the same time loved to meditate, both brains being used. Fast forward 40 years, while I love to read his posts on Facebook, Dennis is working and exploring the subconscious mind. Both of us are on the same wavelength, but that is another story to tell. Judy Provich. My brother John and I have great memories of Judy. She was a delight to be around. Judy loved to meditate. It showed in her day-to-day affairs. She loves life and has a deep passion for all. I haven't seen her in 30 plus years. I love her Facebook posts. Judy, thanks for being a friend to my brother and I. Steve Sitnick. I once remember a story that Steve told one night. He was riding a bike in Central Park that night. Mind you, not too good of an idea. At some point, a group of thieves surrounded him and demanded his money. Steve says something like, "Help me, Miraji." One of the thieves said, "I received knowledge, let him go." I still remember that 45 years later. Steve and I both love to cook. In fact, his profession was cooking. Yes, Steve loves to meditate. I've had many great memories of Steve. Irene Bettler. Irene loves to meditate. I'll always remember the journey we took with Fran. We drove from New York City to Tucson, Arizona. Do you remember seeing the 5 tornadoes stacked in the sky? I have never seen anything like that. I live in Kansas. Unfortunately, never saw a tornado. Thanks for your friendship with Fran, and you are in my heart. Matt Miller. Matt worked at the food co-op. By the way, he loves to meditate. Grin. Matt loves music and to play music. Years later, I love to read his posts. I love what he has to say and the music that he posts. Vinny. Verdiosa. As I remember, Vinny was from Brooklyn. I truly love his Facebook posts. We are on the same wavelength. Of course, Vinny loves to meditate. I love to see the different expressions in life, and Vinny represents it. He has his own radio show. Jeffrey Herman. I've known Jeffrey since the 70s. Jeffrey could sing solo without any instruments being played and totally fill the room with his voice. Great guy. I loved his passion towards life. I have spent many great memories of spending time together. For a while, we were roommates. Howard Kent. Rest in peace, Howard. Your singing voice was angelic. Everyone loved your humor and laughter. A piece of you resides in my heart. I'm sure you're singing with the universe. Jan Ely. Jan was soft-spoken, yet he had the spirit of a wild horse, which means he did things the average person wouldn't do. For example, walking the entire Pacific Coast Trail from the border of Mexico to Canada. Jan would update his posts on Facebook along the way. It wasn't an easy journey, but he made it. Jan, thanks for being a part of my life. Michael Coleman. Mostly I knew the parents of Michael. His parents lived in New York while Michael lived in Atlanta. The entire family loved to meditate. I loved his parents. They're always a joy to be around.
I still read Michael's Facebook post. Hey Michael, send my love to your parents, wherever they may be, in heaven or earth. Molly Zimmerman. I remember Molly was probably in her early 20s when I first met her. She was extremely wise for her age. I have many fond memories of talking to her. Yes, she loved to meditate. Meditation is truly the string that ties us together. Fast forward 40 years, and I love to read her post. She is living in California. David Anderson. David used to play this one song that would send shivers down my brother's John's and my back. I don't remember the name of the song. It was over 40 years ago. David has the capability to tap deep within his soul and create such beautiful music. Billy Riggs. I love Billy. He was a great tennis player. His dad was the famous Bobby Riggs. Billy practiced Tai Chi many years with Joe Lopez. I remember Billy was close friends with Paul McLean in the 70s. There was a short time where we were all roommates. Elise Kaplan. There was a short period of time where Elise and I were boyfriend and girlfriend. I once stayed at her parents' house for a week. I loved her mother. She was into the healing arts in the early 70s. I remember in Denver, Elise made this tofu Chinese peapod dish with hoisin sauce. It was out of this world. At the time, it was probably at the forefront of the culinary world. My heart goes out to Elise. Wherever you are, I send my love. Buffalo, France. Rick Milkus. I loved Rick. He could put a smile on anyone's face. I've known Rick for many years. I haven't seen him in over 30 years. Rick adds to the spice of life. He loves to meditate. What else can I say? Dina Eccles. Dina wasn't from Buffalo. I remember going from Buffalo, New York to Rochester, New York in a huge snowstorm. It was virtually a whiteout. Barbara Kolodny was in the car. Dina, I really didn't know you very well, but I was impressed by your presence. I can't quite pinpoint it. How can you pinpoint the infinite? Years later, I love to read your post. Curtis Gold. I first met Curtis in Buffalo, New York in the 70s. Kurt was always a delight to be around. I remember Kurt had a zest for life. I think it was custom made for him. I would say he would think outside of the box. Years later, I see his Facebook post. He is selling his incredible soups at open-air markets in the Northeast. Great guy, great friend. Kathy Deutsch. Kathy is another person who I love to be around. I knew her in New York City and Buffalo. There was a time when I lived in Florida we would get together. Fast forward 40 years, and I love to read her posts. She has such a wonderful family. I love her heart. She has some friends of hers that I have known for over 40 years. Once again, the thread of life that ties us all together. Richard Scarborough. Richard and I go way back. I first met him in Buffalo, New York during the 80s. During the 80s, I moved to California. I spent some time windsurfing with him. He moved to Asheville, North Carolina a few years ago. Great guy. Loved spending time with him. Yes, he loves to meditate. Jack Leviton. Jack and I go back 45 years or so. I knew him in New York City. I remember playing basketball with him. Jack is extremely tall. The only way I could shoot was to do my famous hook shot. Jack has a tremendous sense of humor. I love being around him. Tom and Nancy Owen. I remember first meeting them in Buffalo in the late 70s. In the early 80s, we lived in the same complex as they did. Tom was a great carpenter. I really loved both of them. Nancy had a heart of gold. I really mean that. Both of them truly enjoyed life to its fullest. Steve Kowarski. Steve was another great person to be around. I never met his wife. Steve loved to meditate. Years later, I loved to see his posts on Facebook. Both of them truly are expressing their deep feelings into their life. I like that. Barbara Kolodny. Barbara wasn't from Buffalo. She spent some time there. I first met her in New York City. She wasn't from there either. Barbara definitely had a huge aura of love around her. I remember making these incredible sandwiches in Rochester, New York with her. They were out of this world. The sauce was incredible. I haven't seen nor heard about her in 40 years. Wherever you are, Barbara, I send my love.
James and Connie Garcia. I have known James and Connie since 1976. We all ended up in Florida during the 80s. We became great friends. For a while, they lived across the street from us. I remember one time we all went to Disney World. Connie's aunt made an incredible Japanese lunchbox for all of us. I was in heaven. It's been over 30 years since I've seen them. They will be forever in my heart. Ovidio de Leon. First met Ovidio in New York City. We first learned how to windsurf together in Miami. He took over the business that we rented equipment from and ran it for over 30 years. Great friend of mine. Kike Bocanegra. I went to Peru for a surfing vacation and stayed at the Bocanegra's house in Miraflores. The entire family welcomed me. Kike is a dear friend. We became surf buddies when I lived in Del Mar. Alex Shea. Alex and I have been friends since 1972. I worked for Alex on a project for a huge mansion in Miami Beach. I remember Alex going out and getting pizza and a favorite drink of mine called Malta. We used to play tennis together. Also going to Bihari Singh's house and having great Indian dinners and watching Indian movies. Rajaji. There was a time in my life where I was learning how to balance my spiritual life and my day-to-day life. Rajaji was a great mentor for me. Not through words, but just day-to-day actions. I learned through time that our day-to-day actions is our spiritual life. You can't separate the two. Claudia was a person who really supported me and my family. After my daughter, Leilani, was born, she came over to visit us. She went out of her way. Always remember the great Christmas gifts she would give us. She'll always hold a place in my heart for her kindness. Michael Stubbs. Michael once spent an incredible amount of time recording Disney videos for my family. They were incredible gifts. I always appreciate how kind and considerate he was. I have nothing but great words describing him. Petra was another person who was very kind to my family. I would bring my daughter Leilani to play with Claudia's kids, and Petra was her nanny. Petra was from Germany. She had a great sense of humor. I will always remember her kindness. Alan Rettinger. I first met Alan in New York City in the early 70s. Alan is an incredible chef. Now I like to cook. Alan brings it up 10 slots. I call Alan once or twice a year to catch up on things. Richie Ingwe. Richie and I became good friends. We lived for a while in the same apartment complex. We both worked a while for Alex Shea. Richie was an incredible singer. I mean, incredible. His voice was like an angel. Rest in peace, Richie. Gino Buto. Worked with Gino at the Miami Beach Police Department. We became good friends. Once he gave me a ride in his yellow Ferrari. Recently, I tracked him down after 30 years of not seeing him. He will always be my friend. Susan Gregory. Susan had lived an incredible life. In her 60s, her and Rennie Davis were at the forefront of the anti-war movement. Rennie was part of the Chicago 7. Susan was my girlfriend for 2 years. She definitely had the spark of life. I remember quite fondly going on sailing trips with Bruce Rahm and Susan. We all had the time of our lives. Bruce built this wooden boat all by himself. We would go out on weekends and spend the night on the boat. Great times. Susan, you have a special place in my heart. The Doris Family. I first met Mary working at the Fontainebleau Hilton in Miami Beach. We became good friends. Mary had a son named Jed, who at the time was probably around 10 years old. I used to take him windsurfing with me. During the fall and winter, the Miami area would get incredible strong winds. Jed would hold on to my waist as we reached incredible speeds flying across the water. He had the time of his life. The Doris family moved to Malibu, and Jed learned how to surf. That's probably another story. Mary married Doug Bernard, who I've known since 1973. It's a small world. More South Florida friends. Annie McPherson. I like Annie. Once upon a time, my wife Linda and I would go to the Sellers house and play games. We always had an incredible time. Once they invited us to the Alexander Hotel in Miami Beach. It was a very elegant hotel. They were staying there for a few days. Had a wonderful time with them. Annie has a tremendous heart. As you can see, she loves to play music. Alan Imperato. Alan was a dear friend of mine. At that time, Alan and John Byer were working on a project together. Alan is from Los Angeles. I first met Alan in Denver during the 70s. I once remember he talked about his sister meditating and seeing the inner light. I saw Alan a couple of times when I lived in California in the 80s and 90s. Great friend, great heart. Paula Rosenblum. I've known Paula since the early 70s. I think I first met her in India in 1971. I can't say I ever hung out with her, but it is a small world. My brother John and I have many fond memories of Paula. In the early days, she definitely thought and lived outside of the box. Yes, she loves to meditate. Mary Higgins. I was roommate with Mary for a couple of months in Miami Beach. She was a delight to be around. I have nothing but good memories about her. Yes, she loves to meditate. That is her foundation. Years later, I love to read her Facebook post. Timothy Hogle. I don't like going to the dentist. Yeah, at that time, Tim was like no other dentist. Tim loved to meditate. With this awareness, the dentist's experience went up a few hundred notches. People loved Tim and the work he provided. Thanks, Tim, for your great work you provided. Farooq Ganji. I first met Farooq in India in 1971. Once upon a time, I was in Bethesda, Maryland for a week. Farooq invited me over for some Middle Eastern cuisine. We had baba ganoush, hummus, and feta. Wow, I still remember it 40 years later. I was truly welcomed to his home. I have many fond memories of Farooq. Christian de la Iglesia. When I lived in Florida, Christian was around 10 years old. My wife and I were friends with his family. Fast forward many moons when I discovered he loves to surf and owns a surf shop in South Beach. I like that. Yolanda de Lobo. I first met Yolanda in Miami Beach during the early 70s. Alex Shea and Yolande were living together. I worked with Alex on a project he got. I really didn't know her too well. Fast forward 30 years. I love to read her posts. They are a delight to see. Dwight Sellers. At one time, Dwight and John Byer were best of friends. I got to know Dwight during the 80s while living in Miami Beach. I will always remember the time my wife and I were invited to a nightclub opening. Dwight built the new club. I read his post on Facebook. Dwight definitely has a zest for light. Leroy Rest. I've known Leroy for over 40 years. Our paths crossed many times over the years. Recently, I heard his house burned down during the Malibu fires. I'm glad that you are safe. Marcy Peltzer. Rest in peace, Marcy. I will always remember the good times we had. You are missed. Mitchell Christian. I first met Mitchell in Miami Beach in the 80s. When I moved to Ashland, Oregon, I would see him in the same hatha yoga class at the Y. Mitchell was very humble and kind. I always loved being around him. Linwood Murray. Lynn and I were roommates for a short time in the 80s. I had a great time being around him. Yes, he loved to meditate. Sushil Rao. I first met Sushil in India during the early 70s. He was from India. Years later, he lived in Miami Beach. I remember his passion was writing and poetry. I love that. Phone book, friends. I have this old phone book for around 40 years. Here's some stories to tell. Pam Johnson. I first met Pam in Nelson, British Columbia in 1975. We were living with some friends of mine, the Scholes. The Scholes built a lovely log cabin house. I remember when Bill Scholl cut himself with a chainsaw and they wrapped camphor leaves around it. Fast forward 10 years and Pam is living in Miami Beach. What a small world. Yes, Pam loves to meditate. Chris Vanderhood. Chris was an incredible surfer and board maker. I knew him for a while. Once upon a time, I did a virtual walkthrough of the cannery in Haiku. Chris's surfboard shop was featured. Katya Miller. Katya was a great surfing friend of mine on Maui. She used to live for a couple of years at the Mexican Malibu, way before it was known. She had a great sense of humor. Bill Keating. I used to go sailing on Bill's Hobie Cat in the 80s. He was a great guy to be around. Bill liked to meditate. Lon Cotton. I worked with Lon at the observatory. He was friends with Kurt Carlson. They were in the military together. I taught Lon and a group of friends how to surf. I just found Lon on Facebook. Mauve and Marco. I taught Mauve and Marco how to surf. Marco was a great hockey puncher. George Martin. My dear friend George. George, for a while, was interested in my adventures with the On Maui project. I was interested in virtual reality, and both of us went to a virtual reality conference sponsored by Silicon Graphics. George was also a surfer. My family had many dinners at his house. It was never boring. I remember a couple from Upper Kula who had this incredible house with this huge gym-like building. They had trapeze in the air. They were quite the individuals. George and I became friends with them. Mike Richey. I first met Mike at a San Diego Clippers meeting. Clipper was one of the X-based languages that we used in the development world. Mike and I became friends. I wrote some templates that could be used for developers. It was based upon Walsall's sauce product, Grumfish. It allowed the user to create a photo database by designing your UI on the screen. My company was called Life's a Beach. Mike helped write the manual. Mike was into Tai Chi. Phyllis Motto. I knew Phyllis in Miami Beach. We lived in the same apartment complex. Her baby boy was born premature. By the grace of God, it survived. Phyllis loved to cook and loaned me a book. She left town for a few years and went to Europe. She came back and I returned the book. A great lady, great family. Mind you, this was 30 years ago. Martin Dell. This is another story of the web that ties us together. Martin is John Byer's stepdad. I first met him in the 70s in New York City. 10 years later, I live in Miami Beach. Martin comes down frequently to go windsurfing. He buys an apartment in Miami Beach. We develop a great relationship. I remember the great restaurants we would go to. Fast forward a few years, I'm living in San Diego. I get a phone call from Martin saying he's coming to town for a few days, invites me to go sailing with him and his son's friends. In the 70s, I babysat him in New York City. One interesting story about Martin. At one point in time, he was a diplomat serving in France. He was quite young at the time. Many times, people would ask Martin, "Could we see your father?" not knowing he was a diplomat. Rest in peace, Martin. I have great memories of you. Mary Lou. For a short time, I stayed in Mary's house in Sedona. Brian Bells, my wife, and I were roommates. I remember one Christmas taking a walk after a snowstorm from the backyard. It was wide open. I loved to see the snow among the red rocks. My wife and I still remember this today. Hi, Mary Lou. It's been 30 plus years. Nellie. Nellie is dear to my heart. She is as close to a mother as one can have. Maybe she was my mother on another planet. Grin. It's a long story to tell. Rob complained. John Byer and Rob were business partners for a period of time. They were importing plumbing from Europe. I remember writing a software program for the business. I first met Rob in Denver in the 70s. In the 80s, he and his families moved to Miami Beach. I always remember the great party he had. Great memories of Rob. Norma Thompson. I first met Norma in San Diego in the 80s. Her husband had a brainwave facility. I remember many times going to use their flotation tanks. That was quite the experience. Fast forward 15 years. My daughter and I are sitting in a car in Ashland, Oregon. I hear this voice and it sounds like Norma. It looks like Norma, but I'm not sure. A few days later, I'm at the Y with my wife, and we run into Norma. What a small world. When we moved to Maui, Norma with my wife to Maui for a vacation. Ashlea Nelson and Bob Neal. I first met Ashlea in Phoenix during the 80s. 10 years later, I bumped into her into Maui. Ashlea married Bob Neal, and I cooked an Indian feast for the wedding reception. I very liked Bob. He owned a series of dry cleaning stores in Maui. I helped him in some software projects. Ashlea started a successful dolphin touring company. Steve and Annie Oakley. I remember taking a road trip with the Oakleys in the 70s. We drove from Denver to Miami. Elise Kaplan was friends with the Oakleys. At that time, Steve coordinated the meals for many of the festivals held in the States and around the world. Fast forward 10 years. We are both living in Miami Beach. Steve has been an acupuncturist for 30 plus years. He is living with Annie in Boulder, Colorado. Bob Holding. Bob was a character. I remember I was working on this mansion, and Bob would be practicing his golf swing by driving golf balls into the bay. He had quite the swing. Bob was great at cutting trees. I worked for him around a year. He had quite the sense of humor. Let's put it this way, the job was never boring. Phone book friends, too. Steve Price. I first met Steve in New York in the early 70s. In the 80s, I'm living in Miami Beach. I'm a brand new software developer. On the side, I'm working with Jim Hessian and Steve. This is the beginning of my incredible career. Steve was bright and a delight to work with. Yes, Steve loved to meditate. I haven't heard from Steve since then. Mona Patterson. What can I say about Mona? She was one of the midwives for my daughter's Leilani birth. Leilani was born at home and had a water birth. I will always remember placing Leilani in a tub of warm water, and this incredible smile came on her face. Mona was incredible. I have great memories of her. Joe and Dee. Joe and Dee were landlords for our complex in Del Mar. We recently moved from San Diego. To be honest, our credit at that time wasn't the greatest. There was an opening at the complex, and Dee was kind enough to rent us a place fast without doing a credit check. She said, once you're in, they won't kick you out. We became good friends. Ron Peters. Ron was a medical doctor. I first met him in New York City in the early 70s. 15 years later, he is living in Malibu. I remember him and his wife Kathy invited me over for lunch. I had a great time. I have great memories of Ron. He loved to meditate. Roy. My friend Roy was out on this day. One of my favorite surf spots was Pakakalo near Wailuku. It is a river mouth reef break. One day I surfed in the morning and it was 4 to 6 Hawaiian. The Hawaiians measured the waves by their back, so a 4-foot wave to them is 2 feet. Anyway, the swell then went to 6 to 8 feet and then 10 to 12 feet. The waves were so large that when they broke, the ground would shake 25 feet below. I remember that one huge set came in, and I was at the right place at the right time. I paddled hard, and I dropped in easily. I did a bottom turn, and this huge wave tunneled over me. I was riding with pure delight. My friends were in the channel paddling, and they were screaming with joy what they were seeing. It's probably the best wave of my life. It took a long time to make it to shore. When I did, many of the surfers wanted to kiss the ground because of how large it got in such a short period of time. Al was another great surf buddy. I went to Tavarua with him and the gang. I remember the great times we would go up the Hana coast in Maui and score good waves all to ourselves. We both were dawn patrollers. I would get to the beach before the sunrise and paddle out. Many times, Al would paddle out with me. Matt Kinoshita. Boy, could he ever surf. He had it in his veins. I went on a surfing trip to Tavarua with him. I never saw such incredible surfing. Matt is a humble soul. He didn't say much. He lets his actions describe who he is. Matt has been making surfboards for many years. He has been a great mentor for the younger generation. Great person, great heart. He carries the aloha spirit with him. Felipe Ricketts. When we moved from Sedona to San Diego, a dear friend of mine said we could stay a few days at his house. To make a long story short, it didn't work out that way. Our friend introduced us to Felipe. Now Felipe likes to meditate, and he was a surfer. A few days later, we moved right next door to him. We've become good surfing buddies. The web of life continues. 10 years later, I'm working on a project in San Diego. I'm living in Nevada City. I'm flying back and forth. During the work week, I'm staying at Felipe's house and paying him to stay there. We go surfing a lot together. I'm into snowboarding, and one weekend Felipe flies up and we go snowboarding together. I will always remember the time we went camping in the High Sierra. Felipe Duran. Felipe was my daughter Leilani's stepfather. He was an incredible dad to her. Leilani has told me many great stories about him. Thanks, Felipe, for being who you are. You mean a lot to me. Randy Redinges. Randy was a cousin of mine. I have many great memories of him. As a child, we go to Pasadena and visit his family. Randy learned how to surf and we go surfing together. As a matter of fact, he still continues to surf. He would take a whole month off and his family would travel to Mexico. Fast forward 20 years and I'm living in Del Mar. Randy is living in Encinitas right down the road. What a small world. Richard Grossman. My brother Richard and Honolulu were great friends. Richard is one who thinks and lives outside of the box. I like that. He's been a shaman for over 40 years. He also is an acupuncturist. I have great memories of Richard. Glenn James. Glenn has been producing Hawaii's Weather Today for many moons. I once saw myself surfing at Waipio on his show, and he was kind enough to give me a video. Great guy. He provided a great service to the people of Maui. John Gaudel. John and his lovely wife lived in the same complex as we did in Miami Beach. We became running buddies. We would love to run at the golf course in Miami Beach. I have many great memories of that. John also loves to meditate. Years later, I met John again in Del Mar. We had a great lunch and get-together. Gary Sportsman. I first met Gary in New York City. In the 80s, Gary is living in Miami Beach. Gary loves to meditate. He also loves to practice Hatha Yoga. I haven't seen Gary in many moons. May our paths one day be crossed. Jim Hessian. I first met Jim in New York City in the 70s. In the 80s, Jim got my first software developer job for a company he was working with. Jim and I did several software development jobs for companies in South Florida. I had a great time working with him. I remember a great party he threw. This was during the Michael Jackson phase when the album Thriller just came out. I haven't seen nor heard about Jim in 30 years. Ike and Amara. Ike and Amara live in the same neighborhood as we did in Penn Valley. He originally was from Turkey. For a while, he was my running partner. I will always cherish the dinners at your house. Both of you were great hosts. Would love to hear from you again. Dave Chalmers. Dave and I worked for a while for the Navy SEALs in Coronado. During lunch, we would go boogie boarding. The Navy SEALs had a policy. If you exercised during lunch, you had a 1.5 hour lunch break. We took advantage of that. James Walton. James is a good friend of mine. When I moved from Florida back to California, I stayed at his house for over a month. I remember the great time we had a retreat to Mendocino. What a great time we had. I haven't seen nor heard anything in 30 years. Rose Ahart. Rose was interested and instrumental in my writing. During the 80s, I was living in Maui and working at the observatory. Rose and I became good friends. I told her my story, and she said, "Why don't you write a book?" Well, I did. It's always a work in progress. Rose spent some considerable time editing. Fast forward 20 years, I'm living in Kansas City. Out of the blue, I get a telephone call from Rose. Well, what a blast from the past. She spent some time tracking me down. I had great memories of her. We are on the same wavelength in life. Jennifer De Dios. I used to work with Jen at Charles Schwab. We became good friends. I love hearing the adventures of her family. It is never boring.
Mentors. We are all shaped by our society. No man is an island. We all learn from each other. These are the teachers who helped shape my life for the better. Joan Condon. Mrs. Condon was my English teacher. She had a sparkle for life. I remember one day a student played on a record player all over the watchtower at Jimi Hendrix. She led a beautiful discussion on lyrics, which I still remember today. She was innovative in her teaching style. It was fun and entertaining to go to her class. Betty Topalian. Mrs. Topalian was my poetry teacher in my senior year. She taught me the love of poetry. I remember one day we had an assignment to read a poem. I found a spiritual poem and read it to the class. She asked me what it means, and I said it was self-explanatory. To be honest, I had no clue. She knew that and was kind enough not to go further. She inspired me to look at ways that are different in society. There is a world where words come from, will come up to the surface to be a creative force for mankind. She helped me to dive deep to discover the pearls of life. Bob Wentz. What can I say about Bob Wentz? He was a figurehead in Newport Harbor for many years. He was my speech teacher. He thought outside of the box. Nick Roth and I had to give a speech together. We asked Mr. Wentz if we could do a talk on surfing at the beach. He said yes. He somehow managed to arrange a bus to take students to Newport Pier where Nick and I did a surfing demonstration and a talk on surfing. He really cared about his students and would do things out of the ordinary. Julia Smart. Julia was my culinary arts teacher. Wow, what can I say? She taught me by following a recipe, you can make anything you want. This opened me up to the world of cooking. I never took two and two together. Since then, my passion for ethnic food has skyrocketed. This opened up many new doors. My cooking partner was Scott Adams, a neighbor for many years. We had a lot of fun cooking together. I still remember the good times. Jim Hemsley. Mr. Hemsley was a surfer and teacher at a high school. I remember surfing at Huntington Pier one day, and I saw Mr. Hemsley swimming to shore. It was quite a big day. I said, "Hi, Mr. Hemsley. Do you need any help?" He said yes. So we slowly paddled to shore in my longboard. We made it to shore, and then I paddled out again. The waves were quite good that day. About 6 months later, my mom bumps into Mr. Hemsley and said, "Your son saved my life. Without him, I would have drowned." I nonchalantly didn't think anything at the time.